You ever see a disaster coming from a mile away and just know deep down in your bones that nobody's gonna listen until it all comes crashing down? That's what happened to me with the new bridge at Coldwater Ridge. A story that started with a cheap flyer, bold red letters screaming about progress, and ended with a flood, a courtroom, and a neighborhood finally waking up. I'll never forget the day I pulled that glossy announcement out of my mailbox. HOA approves new Coldwater Ridge Bridge. Safer, stronger, beautiful. Sure, it looked all shiny in the rendering, stretching over the gulch like something out of a suburban fairy tale. But I've seen enough artist impressions to know that real life is always messy. I'm not just a cranky retiree with nothing better to do. I spent 23 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, patching up bridges in Baghdad, Kandahar, Mosul, places where you learn quick what happens when folks cut corners with concrete. It doesn't just crack. It betrays. So when the HOA announced they'd have a bridge built across that gulch, on a shoestring timeline no less, my hackles went up. That gulch might seem tame in dry season, but when spring runoff comes, it's a monster. Water roaring down at 40 knots, carrying everything from uprooted trees to busted shopping carts. I've even seen a camper shell careen through like a torpedo. You don't slap a bridge across that without doing your homework, soil types, flood data, the works. But when I checked the site plans on the HOA corkboard, I nearly laughed. No rebar map, no FEMA flood model, and the construction company, Whitmore Construction Solutions LLC, was so new their only online project was a stock photo I recognized from an engineering textbook. First HOA meeting after the flyer? The room's packed. Neighbors in lawn chairs sipping burnt coffee. Karen Risson perched up front in her blazer, arms crossed, eyes daring anybody to challenge her. Karen's the kind of HOA president who wears power like bad perfume. Loud, clingy, and impossible to ignore. I stood up, polite as you please. Has the HOA conducted a geotechnical survey, or at least had the pilings inspected by the county? Karen blinked like I'd started speaking Greek. Mr. Merrick, we've had experts review everything. Which experts? The firm has decades of experience. They formed last June, Karen, I replied, calm as a saint. Registered at a UPS store. That's not decades. She bristled. Neighbors started shifting. This project was approved by the community, Mr. Merrick. If you have concerns, submit them in writing. I already had 3 times. But nobody was listening. That bridge went up at breakneck speed. Sycamores gone overnight, soil graded by a rental bulldozer. I watched a crew dump aggregate base straight into the gulch. No filtration, no compaction, like they were making a patio, not a foundation. On a foggy March morning, I watched them pour the slab from my truck. The concrete coming out looked all wrong. Too thin, too soupy. Ask anybody who's poured a slab, it should be creamy, not watery. Watery means the aggregate sinks, the structure weakens, and one big flood later you're not patching a crack, you're watching the whole thing fail. I started taking pictures, videos, even zoomed in on the foreman's clipboard. Mix ratio scribbled in Sharpie, no initials, no batch tags. When the truck drove off without rinsing out the drum, I knew something was off. Means they either overordered or didn't pour everything. Where'd the extra go? Who knows? HOA says you're trespassing if you cross the tape. I pointed at my house just 60 feet away. This isn't a military zone, I muttered. Tell that to your HOA, he shot back. That night I sent Karen one last email. I attached FEMA overlays, rainfall records, county soil guidelines, even offered to meet with the contractor myself. No reply. And every day the skeleton of that bridge grew, the horror in me growing right along with it. The day they poured the final slab, the HOA threw a party. Lemonade, streamers, Karen in her power blazer shaking hands like she'd launched a rocket. I stayed on my porch listening to the wind and waiting because concrete doesn't lie. Spring rains were coming. 2 days before the storm, I could feel it in my knees, that old ache from a Humvee rollover outside Ramadi. The air just changes before trouble hits, you know? I watched the bridge. Painted railings, fancy finials, but I knew underneath it was all hollow ambition and cheap slurry. I printed out everything. Risk assessments, flood maps, site photos showing gravel peeking through thin concrete. A timeline showing how fast they built this thing versus a real federally inspected bridge. Most importantly, I included a copy of the HOA bylaws. Anything over $100,000 needed outside audit. They'd ignored it. I walked into the HOA office at 9:02 a.m. Sharp binder in hand, my old military laptop under my arm. Karen looked up, lips pinched. "You'll want to see this," I said. She rolled her eyes but let me talk. I flipped to a photo. Concrete sloshing over loosely wired rebar. "This will collapse," I said. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But the first big storm, it'll go." She cut me off. "You're not an inspector, you're a retiree." "I'm a former structural engineer," I said, voice low. "I don't need a title to see shoddy work. I live 20 yards from this thing. I'm part of whatever dies if it fails." Just then Brad Whitmore walked in, the HOA treasurer, thick-necked, chewing gum, always with that air of, "What's your problem?" His family owned half the businesses in town, including, I suspected, this sketchy construction outfit. "Worried about a little crack, Merrick?" He grinned. "I'm worried about a bridge snapping and killing somebody." I shot back. Karen stepped in, ending it. "If you interfere again, we'll file for harassment." I picked up my binder, left a copy behind, and walked out, passing Trina Wilkes, a board member who never met my eyes. Outside, storm clouds gathered. Real ones. I drove straight to municipal offices. No permit filed. No floodplain administrator notice. No soil records. They'd papered over everything with internal votes and vague invoices. The land fell just outside the FEMA zone, so they dodged real oversight. But I had a contact, Sergeant Clay Atwell, retired Army Ranger, now head of county infrastructure compliance. We dug latrines side by side in Bram. I called him. "Russ, how long's it been?" "Too long." "You got a minute?" "Always." We met for brisket and beer. I showed him my evidence. He whistled. "They cut this corner so sharp, it's a triangle. Clay, someone's gonna die." "Storm's coming," he said. "You think it'll hold?" I just shook my head. The storm broke at 3:17 a.m. Thunder shook the windows, rain hammered the roof. I pulled on boots, poncho, and grabbed my tactical light. Down at the gulch, water was rising fast. Then I saw it. A crack, not just hairline, but a full fissure, bleeding muddy water from the seam between two deck panels. Concrete doesn't bleed unless it's dying. I backed away, heart pounding. By dawn, the sky was gray and washed out. I hadn't slept. At 6:48 a.m. I heard it, a low, wet rumble. The bridge had dipped 2 inches in the middle. Water was cresting against the supports, lapping over footings that were supposed to be 5 feet higher. I threw on my rain gear, phone in hand. By the gulch's edge, I found the real smoking gun. A section of erosion netting flapping loose, embankment collapsing, soil sliding away from a mess of exposed, rusted rebar, bent, torch cut, salvaged. I snapped photos, then heard footsteps. Brad. Soaked through, no hard hat, just arrogance. "You're trespassing," he barked. "I'm documenting a safety threat," I replied. "This is a crime scene." He grabbed my arm. I twisted out, military muscle memory, caught his wrist and let go. "Don't touch me. I've got this on video. You'll regret this, old man." "I already do," I muttered, walking home. Back at my desk, I sent everything to Clay. "Bridge structural instability. Urgent." 10 minutes later, he replied. "I'll send someone by after sunrise. Don't engage further." By midday, the bridge was groaning. No warning from the HOA. No closure. At 1:22 p.m., a delivery truck rolled across. The bridge dipped, dust puffed from the seam. That was it. I flagged the next car. "Don't cross," I yelled. The driver paused, saw my face, and backed up. I stood in the rain for an hour, waving off traffic until Clay arrived with his clipboard. "You weren't kidding," he said, eyes on the churning water. We walked the site, measured, called in county emergency response. Brad glared from the other side. Karen showed up, shouting about blowing things out of proportion. Clay ignored her. "This bridge is compromised. Block both ends." Karen sputtered, but it was over, control slipping from her hands. That night, the emergency sirens wailed. Water thundered down the gulch, the bridge dead center in its path. I threw on my old field jacket, grabbed my go bag and flashlight, and sprinted to the gulch. Could barely see the bridge. It was buried beneath a surge of debris and mud. Then through the storm I saw stress fractures splitting down the span, Support columns listing, rebar twisted out like the guts of a dying animal. Neighbors gathered, phones out, rain pouring down. 2 kids on scooters came barreling down the sidewalk, oblivious. "Stop!" I yelled, waving my light. I made it to the base just in time, got them to turn back. Then as they rolled away I heard the boom. The bridge lurched, water surged over, and with a groan the center span broke free, slabs tumbling into the abyss. Silence. The kind that hits right before the consequences show up. Police, fire, neighbors all gathered. Karen, stunned, couldn't answer as firemen demanded inspection reports and contracts. Clay arrived, called for a full investigation. The next morning in the pale light, I inspected the wreckage. The columns, shells barely 4 inches thick, hollow centers, empty where strength should have been. Fraud, plain and simple. Clay brought county engineers, state inspectors, deputies. They cordoned off the gulch, took samples, questioned everyone. Karen tried to spin it as a natural disaster, but even her board started crumbling. Neighbors whispered. Pamela told me she'd never voted for the project. Gary wondered where his $1,200 in dues had gone. People got angry, the slow-burning kind you can't hush with a newsletter. That night I cataloged every bit of evidence. Emails, photos, old meeting minutes where Karen had overruled calls for independent audits. Clay called. DA launching a formal investigation. I gave him everything, including an audio file I'd recorded of Karen and Brad joking about saving money by skimping on concrete thickness. Insurance, baby. Karen laughed. That's what premiums are for. The next days were a blur. Subpoenas, deputies escorting Brad out of the clubhouse, Karen lawyering up. But the dam had broken. Neighbors signed petitions, Trina resigned and flipped, bringing meeting minutes showing deliberate material reduction. Approved, off the record. Forensic accountants uncovered $142,000 missing, laundered through shell companies. Local news ran drone footage of the collapse. Bridge to nowhere. HOA fraud exposed. That's when the AG indicted Karen, Brad, and 2 others for fraud and endangerment. A week later, we filled the gym for a town hall. People cried, people yelled, people asked how this could have happened. When I spoke, I held up a photo of hollow rebar. This is what happens when nobody speaks up, I said, voice steady. I didn't want to be a whistleblower. I wanted to be a neighbor. But when the structure cracks, someone has to sound the alarm before it all falls apart. For the first time since the flood, I felt the neighborhood building something Ray all trust. Turns out the rot ran deeper than we thought. 12 board members implicated, every official tied to scam payments, conflicts of interest and fake approvals. Whitmore Construction, a shell company run by Brad's cousin, funneled $500,000 in contracts to unlicensed day laborers. When the feds closed in, cousin Paul Whitmore flipped, confessing to the whole scheme. How Karen traded contracts for kickbacks, how the work was designed to look done but never survive a real storm. A court-appointed receiver, Elena Cortez, took over. She pushed for open meetings, full transparency, real third-party oversight. And the community finally started healing. Karen, arraigned in county court, faced 19 counts. Brad, 22. Civil suits followed. Property damage, trauma, even a delivery driver claiming PTSD after crossing minutes before collapse. The HOA's insurer pulled coverage for willful negligence. Cold Water Ridge made the national news. Bridge built on lies. But I didn't give interviews. The truth had already spoken. The city took over reconstruction. This time a real firm, Lee and Anderson Engineering, handled the job. Weekly tests, deep pylons, seismic dampeners. The new project lead, Joanna Lee, handed me the plan, said, "We'll build you a better one." And for the first time in months I believed her. That summer the HOA was dissolved, 92% vote. We went to a city-run panel, open meetings, no more secrets. The new bridge? Beautiful, strong, honest. I wrote a plaque with Joanna. Built on integrity for everyone. In memory of what was lost, in honor of those who stood firm. And as Pamela's youngest biked across, calling, "Hi, Mr. Merrick," I knew it would hold just like trust finally had. When the local paper asked for a quote, I just sent, "The strength of any structure isn't in the concrete. It's in the people who refuse to let it fail." They printed it at the top of the page. Because bridges can fall and trust can be broken. But there's always something stronger waiting to be built. Something rooted not in silence but in truth. And this time we weren't building for appearances. We were building for real. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you speak up, risk it all if you saw something cracking under the surface? Drop your thoughts below, share your own stories, because silence builds nothing but ruins, and every neighborhood deserves something better. 1.